Good evening. Welcome everyone to our Ask the Experts, Human Trafficking, Protections for Youth and Young Adults Online While Social Distancing. We're going to wait a couple more minutes and let our attendees finish joining in, and then we'll get started with an introduction of our experts for the evening. Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started by meeting our experts for the evening. We have 3 people who will be joining our question and answer panel, as well as the presenter for the evening. Let's get started with a little introduction of each of them. We have Holly Kempler. Holly is a prevention and intervention specialist at North County Lifeline, and she's part of the Project Life program there. Holly has a master's degree in social work and pupil personal services credential in school social work. As the prevention and intervention specialist for Project Life, she provides prevention education services to youth, parents, and community members. Additionally, she provides therapy services to commercially sexually exploited youth and young adults. And next we have Caitlin Wilson. Caitlin is the housing coordinator and therapist for North County Lifeline's Project Life program. Caitlin has her master's degree in mental health counseling and is a registered associate clinical professional counselor in the state of California. And our final panelist is Jennifer Gelati. Jennifer comes to us from San Diego Youth Services, part of the iCare program. iCare is a drop-in center for mental health clinical services that offers services 7 days a week to those who are at risk or currently involved in commercially sexually exploited youth up to 21 years of age. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Caitlin for our presentation.
Thank you, Monet, and welcome everyone. So glad you're here. I'm really excited to share on this topic and to dive in with you guys. But first, I just want to do a couple of housekeeping things. On your webinar, if you can see on your screen, I want you to take notice that there is a button for questions, polls, and handouts. And we would love for you to interact and engage with us throughout this presentation. We would love to hear your questions. So if anything comes up for you while we're going through the presentation, just feel free to click on that, submit your question, and then our panelists, we will answer as many questions as possible in the time allotted at the end. And if we can't get to them, we'll give you some feedback later via email. And then also we're going to have some polls that are going to pop up and we're going to ask you to respond to. So I would love for you to answer those just so we can get some feedback from you guys as well. And then you can see we have our handouts. And if you click on those, there's some really great extra resources for you to download and to take a look at on your own after the presentation. So the first thing I want to start with actually is a poll so we can kind of get familiar with how those will work. So I'm going to select the first poll just to get an idea of who we have here watching with us. If you'll see up on your screen, it says who is watching this webinar. And if you could select one or more of the following, and submit that answer. We'll give it a minute or so to get those in. Great, I can see those percentages kind of coming in with some parents, some youth, welcome, some service workers, and then other. All right, we'll give it a few more seconds. And we'll close it up. All right, and now we'll show you, all the attendees, our results as well. So this is kind of what was submitted. We have 20% parents, 2% youth service workers, and other. So welcome everybody, I'm so glad you're here. All right, so let's dive in and get started. All right, here we are with the facts. The first thing I want to start with though is, what is vulnerability? Let's kind of define that, because that's at the heart of trafficking. And so I just want to say vulnerability is a state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. And during this time of COVID and the pandemic, vulnerabilities, as we all are aware, have been incredibly pronounced for many. But I think it's really important that we pay special attention to our community's youth and their vulnerabilities at this time. So we're gonna kind of explore that through this presentation. So starting with these facts, 75% of youth who received an online sexual solicitation did not tell their parents. 64% of teens surveyed admitted they did things online that they did not want their parents to know about. 14% of teens have actually met face-to-face with a person they have met on the internet. And 75% of kids are willing to share personal information online about themselves and their family in exchange for goods and services. And lastly, I think, and very important, is 1 in 5 kids have been sexually solicited to online. So for those of us tuning in locally from San Diego, the FBI has identified San Diego as one of the most active sexually exploitive regions for youth within our country. In San Diego County, youth are most often recruited on middle school or high school campuses, as well as online. So right now, with our local schools functioning within a distance learning capacity, you can imagine that youth are spending a lot more time online. Predators are looking to recruit and groom these youth into exploitation, and they are spending more time online as well and are getting creative with how they exploit young people during this current climate. Our community's youth are more vulnerable than ever to predators, and they are experiencing social isolation on top of it, and a complete upset to their routines. Next, we're going to kind of look at the impact of COVID specifically on trafficking and on online predators. So this is a message from the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking. They stated, social distancing protects us as a community from COVID-19. However, without school and structured activity, children will tend to spend more time online, exposing them to predators who are also online. The increase of online screen time and lack of social relationships due to social distancing leaves our children vulnerable to grooming and children providing CSAM, which stands for Child Sexual Abuse Material. Our children are at home, but so are the predators that look to exploit them. And I think this is important to note because these messages are coming in from different human trafficking coalitions across the nation, that online exploitation has been increasing. And some of the ways that our youth are more vulnerable right now to predators online, these targeted vulnerabilities can range from low self-esteem to possible economic stress due to maybe family members losing jobs and youth needing to contribute to family income. Also, a lot of families are experiencing conflict. I think we all have experienced to some degree being stuck in the house with our family has its ups and downs. And then also our youth are vulnerable due to any prior or current trauma history. So during the pandemic, these vulnerabilities are present always, but they're definitely being exacerbated during the pandemic. So let's talk a little bit about screen time. Screen time due to COVID is actually increasing a bunch. Youth are spending more and more time on screens and on the internet, whether it's for school or for pleasure. This increased screen time is leading to youth engaging with apps, chat rooms, gaming platforms, and social media where predators are scouting for new victims. Youth are also spending time on these platforms mainly due to being isolated and feeling lonely and craving social interaction, as well as the acceptance and popularity piece that they're experiencing developmentally at their age. And a reality that I kind of want to highlight about the internet is there is this thing called the dark web, and that Google really only highlights 5% of the internet. So the dark web is 95% of the internet. It's not something that you can see or that you can trace. It's actually a place where underground online activity and websites take place. They can't be found using search engines, and to access them, you have to have specific software or IP addresses or configurations. The dark web is used by a lot of different types of people so that they can do predatory things and keep their activity hidden. And this is just one avenue that is used to conduct grooming and operations. So with increased screen time, I think it's really important to highlight the impact that technology has on our behavior. And these facts and this information actually is applicable for youth, but I guarantee that we all have seen it. These facts take place in our own personal lives as adults, even as we have been at home and sheltered in place or social distancing. So the first one is that technology actually takes up mental space in our brain. So our brains only have so much capacity to store information and to take in information. And so too much at one time can cause fatigue and overload for youth, specifically at their developmental age, but also for adults. And I'm sure maybe you've heard a little bit about people who are working remotely or working from home, or students who are doing distance learning, that they're experiencing this kind of screen fatigue or maybe Zoom fatigue, which is actually a chemical reaction in our brains due to the overload of screen time. So that's one impact on behavior that it has. It takes up mental space, and then our youth have less space for other information. The next thing is that it does alter the youth's perception of reality. So social media, gaming platforms, and chat apps do not always portray the truth. There's a lot of deception that happens on these platforms, and there's an altering of reality that can be difficult to discern for our youth due to the screen taking the place between the perpetrator and the youth. So it's very easy for deception to take place to skew our youth's perception of reality through technology. And then it beckons youth to use it. So technology can be very addictive, which some of you may have heard or experienced yourself. And there is some neurochemistry to this. So when we engage with screens, there are endorphins and chemicals such as dopamine that are released in our brains. So this interaction between screens and our brains creates or even mimics the same type of interaction that would happen if we were to get high, maybe using some sort of drug. Nothing specific or to a certain degree, but it does mimic this taking a hit, like this high that we get when we interact with platforms and technology. And this can actually cause addiction to such things, such as on the platform Instagram, like comments, likes, scrolling, or even on Netflix, like binge watching, or on a gaming platform, like being addicted to just gaming and interacting in that way virtually. So it can beckon our youth to come back over and over and use it. So that's definitely one of the impacts. And then kind of in that same line, these next few bullet points, it reinforces one's beliefs. So as you are engaging online, especially on platforms such as Facebook or Instagram, there are algorithms. And when you start liking things and commenting, it does actually shift what you see online. And so for our youth, technology can start to, if they're feeling one way a certain day, say they're feeling down or low or unsupported, or the opposite, if they're having a good day, these platforms can start to reinforce their beliefs in the moment, which also, is contributed to by the neurochemistry that's happening in their brain. And then also it keeps serving up the next thing. So in that same addictive stance that we were just talking about, technology just keeps you coming back for more and serving up the next thing, the latest and the greatest. And kind of it creates that instant gratification mindset for our youth and can impact their behavior. So lastly, it can trick you into thinking it's something more than it is, or that it is actually safe. So kind of like we touched on deception a little bit earlier, it's very easy for technology to present one way and be another. And we'll kind of see a little bit of that in a video clip that we'll watch a little bit later. And then also it turns everyday actions into games. So like on Instagram, it's really easy to get caught up in manipulation or likes or popularity. And a lot of that has to do, again, with like the developmental stage that youth are at and feeling like they need acceptance and they need popularity. So how are predators approaching youth? How is this happening on these platforms? How is technology being used to actually approach our youth? At this point in time, I kind of want to do a poll and see what you guys think. Oops. Let me pull it up here. All right. I just want to get an idea of where you think kids meet traffickers online. So if you could take a minute and just select one of the following answers: dating apps, the dark web, video games, or all of the above. I see some of those answers are rolling in. We'll give it a few more seconds and just see what you guys think. All right, close it out. I think everyone has responded. And then let's share the results. You guys said 0 for dating apps, the dark web, video games, and then all of the above. You're correct, 91%. I mean, video games is also correct, but all of the above is very accurate. So let's get into that a little bit. Let's talk about how this is happening. So how are predators approaching youth? One of the first terms I think is really important to define is grooming. Grooming is preparing or training someone for a particular purpose or activity through trust and relationship building. Sometimes grooming for traffickers can be masked in everyday conversations and may overlap with an individual's needs and desires. Here are some examples of signs to look for in your youth or in your youth's friends. So you can see they're listed in those bullet points. I won't go over all of them, but it does say things like to be on the lookout for are: is your youth engaging with a new boyfriend, girlfriend, or friend, or significant other or partner? Is there a person who is giving the youth a lot of time or attention or gifts, or more than you think would be appropriate in a relationship? Does the youth suddenly have a lot of new things? Goods and services are often exchanged in these grooming relationships. And so that's definitely something to look out for. Um, an example even for females sometimes is that they'll take you, to get your nails done, or they'll get you a new phone or maybe some new jewelry. So that's just something you can be on the lookout for. Is there any isolation that's happening, any secretive activity that you're noticing? Those are all things to be on the lookout for. And then here is another quote from the New Jersey Coalition of Human Trafficking. Predators and traffickers use subtle methods to groom children for exploitation and future trafficking. Grooming can start out with likes on social media and move to buying children gaming dollars or offering support and encouragement. When a child's trust is gained, the exploitation begins. Communicating with children about who they might be connecting with and talking about how to have healthy online interactions is one of the best ways to prevent harm. Shame is a tool used by predators and traffickers, so families need to find ways to reduce shame and have thoughtful conversations with children. So I just want to touch on a little more detail with this because it is like the first step in the process of online predators. Is during the grooming process, predators tend to focus on gaining trust and information from the individual that they're targeting. This information usually will later be used to fulfill an unmet need and to foster dependence on the predator so that they can continue to meet that need. So for the youth, this can look like a shiny new phone, or maybe they're underage and this could be access to alcohol that they're wanting. There's definitely a lot of examples, but those are just two. Next, a predator will attempt to isolate the young person usually. So a trafficker or a predator looking to exploit will focus on spending alone time with the youth. Obviously, right now, a lot of people are not spending alone time in person, but this can look like on chatting apps or in a chat room or on other social platforms. So a predator that's looking to exploit will focus on this alone time and then will try to become what we would consider a major part of the youth's life and try to facilitate distancing them from other important people in their life or from other people in their normal support system, which, like we mentioned earlier, kind of contributes to this isolating approach. They try to isolate the youth. So once these steps kind of are in place and are taken, the predator will then begin, kind of testing the youth and seeing if they can exploit them and how it goes. So the predator will try to maintain control over the youth, often through threats or violence, fear, or blackmail. So that's kind of the scoop on grooming and what that looks like. And now we're gonna explore a little bit of what types of platforms are we seeing this happen are. When I was learning about this for the first time, this was super eye-opening for me. Honestly, this information was what kind of spurred me on to want to learn more and research this topic so that I could share with others, because it was amazing to me how many different platforms there are, and I was shocked at how many I didn't know about. So our youth are now completely dependent on social media apps like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and House Party, among many others, in order to fulfill their basic human needs for connection due to COVID-19, social distancing, and the isolation that we're all experiencing. So this need for connection with individuals outside of their family unit, is really primarily being filled through these platforms right now. So this need is heightened at this age and at this stage of development for preteens and teens. They right now are wrestling with and kind of sorting through this very age appropriate challenge of finding their identity and like finding the way that they operate in the world. So the way that our youth are trying to reach this milestone is simply by seeking independence from their family, developing their own beliefs, their own values. And so because of this, youth who may not normally speak with strangers online may be more likely to engage with someone who says things that meet their unmet needs, especially emotional needs. And I also want to highlight too, just to bring in the LGBTQ population, the online interactions for them are usually higher. They really can find a lot of good community online where they can feel known and they can feel safe and they can kind of explore what they're experiencing with support. And so as much as we want to, as guardians or caregivers, want to make sure we're in the know about these platforms and we're in the know about our youth and how they're operating online, we also want to know that for that population specifically, it is really important that they have access to online support in groups like this. So I just want to highlight that because I think it can be easy to say like, okay, let's delete all these apps on our youth's devices, but really the best approach is actually just learning about the apps and monitoring, maybe coming up with a plan that works for you and your youth to know that they're safe, but they're still able to use these apps and these games. So youth who would normally engage, I think something we're seeing is that youth who would normally engage in things like after school activities or sports with their friends or youth group or things like that that aren't taking place right now due to social distancing, we're finding them turning to video games and we're finding them turning to chat rooms or to online platforms so that they can find this connection still and so they can find the group that they fit in. So even youth who maybe would have never considered, interacting with strangers online now are doing that because they don't have the in-person interaction. So that's just something to take note of. And I think it's worth looking at these apps. You can see here on your left, where under parental warning, it says Whisper and Grindr. We'll talk about a few of these in a little bit more detail. We have Tinder, Chat Avenue. Fortnite at the bottom is a really popular online gaming platform, and so is Minecraft. So got a lot of apps, and then over here you can see how many people are engaging as youth in these apps. All right. Okay, so here are a few more. I know it seems like overwhelming, but there are so many platforms now because apps are so easy to make. Apps are so easy to engage with. We all carry a mini computer around in our pocket each day as our phone. And so these are, again, just some icons that I think are really important to be aware of as caregivers and guardians. Youth and young adults use all of these apps every day. It's super normal for them to be engaging in social media at this stage in their life. One thing that is good to know and be aware of as parents and caregivers is that youth and young adults tend to have more than one account on these apps and platforms. So some of you may have heard of this, but youth and young adults have what appears to be their real account on apps such as Instagram, where they post daily and share about their lives. But what you might not know is a lot of youth actually have a second account, which is commonly known as a Finsta or a fake Instagram account. And the youth and young adults create these fake accounts because they know that some of their caregivers and guardians are actually trying to follow them on these apps. And because they feel like we're watching them, and kind of snooping on them, they definitely create double accounts. So that's just something I want to highlight. And I think it's worth noting and having conversations with our youth about. So yeah, and there's definitely vulnerabilities that come with that and dangerous things that can happen on hidden accounts. So it's important, like I just said, like the most important thing is to communicate and to talk with our youth and young adults about this and how we can be accepting of who they are and accepting of who they're becoming and who they see themselves as in this stage of life. So on that top row, some of the familiar ones you might realize or recognize are, we have Instagram, we have Facebook, we have TikTok, and then we have Twitter. And then there's some other familiar ones, YouTube, Snapchat, and then Whisper is a little bit not as familiar for a lot of adults, and then Monkey. and then House Party. House Party has become really popular during COVID. A lot of people have been using it during quarantine to connect with, for great reasons, with friends and family members, but also there's some definite predator activity on that app as well. And then bottom here we have Periscope, Fortnite, with which I mentioned earlier, Twitch, and Discord. All right, so these are a little bit different. These are messaging apps that you see here on your screen. You see Free Text, Kick, WhatsApp, and Text Plus. And so these apps actually were originally designed to allow text messaging without phone company messaging and data charges. So I know that the first time I ever used one of these, which is WhatsApp, is actually to communicate overseas. So when I was on trips out of the country, I would use these apps to communicate with my parents about where I was, and I could do this without having an international phone plan. So that's kind of where these apps originate from, is for international connection. But what we're seeing now is youth are using these apps for chatting and sexting in private because they find that most adults are unaware of these icons and what these apps mean and what takes place on them. So a good way to kind of describe this to you is I have an iPhone, so I use iMessaging for most of my text messages. And that is, that shows up as an icon on my iPhone. So these apps youth feel like are a little bit more hidden because a lot of adults don't know that there's texting that's happening on, but it's just the same as iMessage. You can send pictures, video, everything back and forth through these apps. So it's good to be aware of these icons and to know whether or not your youth are using them, because a lot of hidden messaging can be happening on there. And these apps can be great. They can be used for positive things, but also they can tend to be a platform where people can operate anonymously, and that can lead to vulnerability, and they can have this like underground environment where anything goes. So again, important to have these conversations with our youth about what these apps are and what they're using them for, and the pros and cons of both of them. All right, dating apps. So this is a good place to talk about a few more apps that youth are engaging in. You can see here there's Tinder at the top with like the little fire sign, Grindr, Bumble, Meet Me. These apps are being used more and more frequently by young adults to participate in romantic relationships. And a lot of these apps can be great. I mean, my sister even met her husband on one of these apps, but we're finding a lot of predators are using these apps and pretending to be someone they're not, to engage and manipulate youth and then end up exploiting them. So again, the danger of these apps is that there really is no accountability. So there isn't a way to know that the person on the other side of the screen is who they say they are. So it's just good to be aware of them, to know if your youth are using them, and to have conversations with them about the dangers and the safety issues surrounding them. So here, I'm not going to read through this whole conversation, but I thought it could be beneficial to let you guys kind of look through it and see maybe what an example of an online conversation could look like with a predator. So Alex 15 here, you can see in the red, his chat name is the youth, and then just Jake 17 would be the predator. And you can see he's a little bit older than Jake, and that he's using a little bit of empathy and compassion and manipulation just to comfort Jake in his home situation. And then he's gaining his trust by relating to him. And then throughout that, he's finally asking him to meet up and to get to know him in person. So just good to kind of look through what an example of that could look like. Okay. I want to send you a poll if you're ready. Hope you're all in here and kind of learning along with me. The next poll that we're gonna launch is, what is the average age for a trafficking victim in San Diego County? So I'm gonna set that up and ask you guys to answer in the next minute or so. Awesome, I see you guys are voting, which is great. Keep that rolling in. All right, the numbers are going up. Awesome, I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay. Hit submit. I'm going to close the poll and let's look at our results. So our results are 12, we have 27%, 14.56, 16.15, and 17.2%. And actually the answer is 16. So the right answer is 16 years old. So seems like that's new information for a lot of people. Obviously it's different in different counties and different areas around the country. Now I'm going to share with you a video. It's just a short, like 2-minute video, and it's from the San Diego Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. And I really want to share this video with you guys because I think, you know, online predators can approach youth in many different ways, and online trafficking can happen in many different ways. But the San Diego Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force has a hotline, and they've created some content on their website. And I think this video really gives us a good depiction of what it can look like and the deception that can happen for our youth in being groomed and approached and then exploited by predators. So we'll give this video just a minute to load, and then we will check that out. I do want to state that it is a little bit heavy. It's kind of intense, but I think it's necessary for us to kind of face that and get a good picture of that. All right, so I know that that can be a heavy reality and hard to take in, but I do just want to highlight that at the bottom here on this slide, which you can see, the San Diego Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force does have a tip line where you can call in if you see any suspicious activity or if you hear about anything happening with your youth or your children. And I just really encourage you to write that number down, and I think it will be in our handouts as well with the hotlines. And I think it's good for us to kind of face these realities and know that it's important to have these conversations with our youth. So moving right along, these are some apps. I haven't really touched on gaming apps or video apps such as Skype and Facebook Messenger and things like that. But just to highlight really quickly, Roblox is a gaming app. Because of the absence of human connection, kids and people are more reliant on technology right now to feel connected. And like we said before, there's some neurochemistry to this. This type of connection is fleeting and requires more stimulus. So we find youth going back to it over and over again. And I really just want, especially after that video, to state like one of the main objectives of this presentation is I think that what we want is for caregivers and parents to feel empowered, that if you know the ins and outs of these apps and the places that your youth are spending their time on screens and technology, you will be so much better equipped to support them, and you'll be able to help them with accessing privacy features and exploring preventative safety procedures with them. So we just really want to encourage you to have these conversations and to learn how to use the parent controls or the monitoring systems that fit for you and your youth during this time. So let's talk a little bit about some of the signs. So is your youth having problems online? We kind of touched on some of these, but you as the caregiver really have the power to support your kids and to help keep them safe during this pandemic and during COVID-19 and social distancing. So as they're put at an increased risk of exploitation, we are put at an increased responsibility to look out for them and to help guide them. So the most powerful step that you can take is to encourage your youth to have open conversations with you about internet safety and healthy relationships. Opening up these lines of communication about these topics early can be extremely helpful. So as your child starts to understand that these discussions are normal, they can tend to be more open about sharing about their online lives with you. So it's never too late to start. I want to say that up front and say that it's really important to start having these conversations as soon as possible and to approach them from a shame-free and safe space when we're speaking with youth about their online activity. So like I said, communication is key. I'm not going to read through all of these. I think you will get a copy of this presentation and it is being recorded. But here are some questions that you can consider asking your youth to engage with them and to start opening up those communication lines. You can see those 3 there with the bullet points. And then also something that we do a lot as clinicians, especially in the human trafficking field, is safety planning. We're always safety planning with our clients around whatever their vulnerabilities are. So this might be a new concept for you as a caregiver or a parent, but it's really important to sit down and ask your youth and talk with them about, you know, what makes them feel uncomfortable online? What kind of interactions do they want to be having? Are the people they're interacting with online, you know, safe? Or are they trying to do things to them that they don't like? So I think it can be really powerful to teach our youth good and healthy boundaries, especially around internet usage, and to discuss potential uncomfortable situations that youth may find themselves in. Because a lot of our youth none of our youth, I should say, are looking to be exploited. None of our youth want to be assaulted or trafficked or exploited. So we as adults have to do our part in helping them be prepared for these grooming situations, knowing that this is a reality and that this is happening on the platforms that they're simply engaging in just for connection. So like I said, the more we talk about it with them, the more they'll be opened up to share with us. And then I think another thing I just want to touch on with communication is it can be really helpful for youth to have another mentor or adult in their life who they feel safe with outside of their primary caregiver to talk about these things with. So that's something to think about and incorporate. So here are a few more things to remember when talking to your youth. As you see here, they're outlined pretty clearly. We've talked about a shame-free, safe space, so not being judgmental when listening and opening up these communication lines. Paying attention to body language is really key. Pay attention to your body language, how you're responding to the youth as they're opening up and being vulnerable, because you really can shut your youth down if you start to be shocked or you start to be judgmental. Yeah, language matters. So make sure you think about that. And then also just be sensitive that your youth may only be able to tell you bits and pieces at a time because there is some embarrassment or there is some fear that's going on for them. There's a lot of emotions around these conversations. So it's good to be patient and to be empathetic, compassionate, and receptive. These are a few things to remember not to do. So kind of the opposite of things to do. And I think I just want to highlight these. Again, they're listed out for you. You can kind of go through them on your own, but don't question what they shared with you or why they have decided to share it with you. We don't want to shut our youth down. We want to embrace where they're at. We want to understand their developmental life stage, and we want to be open to communication with them. Also, sometimes youth don't understand that the situation they found themselves in is actually abusive or unhealthy. So when they're telling you, just knowing that they might not have that concept down, and that might not be their understanding of the situation yet. Again, we said body language and language, just watching how you react verbally or physically in a way that you're communicating. And then, like I said, it might take time for the youth to open up fully. Okay, so lastly, before we get to our panel, I just want to show you here some resources for further info and learning. These on the left, you can see Net Nanny, AVG Family Safety, Web Watcher. These are all resources that will help you with monitoring your youth online, and it's great to look through these, learn about them, and see what's the best fit for you and your family. And then these additional links on the right actually are in one of the handouts that are on your screen that you can one of the 4 handouts that you can download after this presentation. And lastly, these are super important. These are the hotlines and phone numbers. And again, these will also be in one of the handouts that we are providing for you as you have registered for this, this presentation. And now to questions.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. We have a few questions in about 10 minutes. So if you, Holly and Jen are ready, I'll read the first one and you can decide who's going to take it.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, and if
Jen
you want to
and
turn
Holly,
your
if you
screens
want
on, then everyone can see you.
Yeah,
Okay.
hi everyone.
First question. I've seen online that grooming is more common through a close friend or relative rather than a stranger. Is this true? What are your thoughts on this?
All right, does Holly or Jen? I've done a lot of talking, so do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can jump in. So
Okay.
hi everyone. So grooming, typically we do see it happening. We see it happening with family members. We also see it happening online with strangers. So you're absolutely right. It can happen with people that are known to, you know, the youth, and it looks a little bit different, but it's still kind of the same idea. You know, sometimes really a child, it's sad, but they can be groomed into trafficking through their whole lives. And you'll see this, like an example is maybe in a family who's been kind of like gang involved historically. That might be kind of a method of how money is made. And so the grooming is kind of started when a youth is young to kind of allow them to understand that that's normal, right? And I think too, a lot of people don't realize that some grooming happens societally. So, you know, in our society, right, it's very normal to hear, you know, vulgar language about women in rap music or sexualized images in magazines or commercials. So that can also be helping in that grooming process.
Yeah, Jen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I second what Holly said. I think that that definitely can happen, and we see that happen. You know, grooming within the family or close family friends. I would speak just from the clients that I worked with. I would say the majority has been more of outside the family, but that definitely does happen. And you know, they're so vulnerable, and it makes them such it gives them such easy access when they're in the family, and when they're friends of the family. So that's also a big thing too to kind of keep in mind, and when we're thinking about what makes youth vulnerable.
Okay, thank you. Did you have anything to add, Caitlin?
The only thing I would say, and I agree with everything Holly and Jen have stated. I think this question is really important because a lot of youth actually, I think the way I want to phrase it is a lot of youth do experience sexual abuse. We know that 1 in every 4 women have been sexually abused. And so they may, part of their grooming process by a stranger or someone online is that predator finds out that the youth has been previously abused and uses that vulnerability to further exploit them. Like we were talking about, kind of like if they can find out the youth's weak spots or kind of their shame spots, and the predators can use that to further manipulate or make them dependent on them, and then further groom them and bring them into exploitation or trafficking. So I just want to touch on that I think a lot of times people think traffickers may be close family, friends, or relatives, because we do see that a lot with child sexual abuse. But in regards to trafficking, a lot of time that's a precursor, not always, by any means, not always, but sometimes. And then that is a vulnerability that our youth experience that leads them to further exploitation.
Okay. Next question. Actually, these next couple ones have to do with some of the apps and platforms that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
This one, can messages or content be sent through YouTube Kids?
That's a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to state that I am not a techie. So I'm going to put that out there, that my expertise is not in all of the ins and outs and details of every app. I do know that YouTube Kids particularly does have messaging. I know this because of Facebook Kids messaging. I used to be a nanny, and I message with my kids that I used to nanny through Facebook Kids Messenger, not regular Messenger, because the settings are different and there are parental controls, and you can set who your kids can talk to and who they can't. So I would say, from my knowledge, I would say definitely do more research. Do your own research. But if the parent is monitoring the kids, like the YouTube Kids account, if you're checking in on it, if you're chatting with your kid about it, I think you can set up preferences that disable messaging or allow it, as far as I know. But I don't know if Holly or Jen have used either of those platforms or had youth who have used those platforms either.
I haven't, but I would say kind of what Katie said, if there's any sort of way for them to communicate with each other, whether it's chat or even just like comments, you know, like on, I know regular YouTube, you can comment on the videos and then conversations kind of get started in the comments. So I would say just be mindful of those sorts of things. And then also, I know there were some in the resource page on the PowerPoint, you know, but really just looking into different apps that are out there that you can use to kind of help you in monitoring your kids' social media and texts and phones. And it's actually, I think, a really good way to go, because instead of having to physically take your kiddo's phone and look through it, things like that, it kind of, like, there's one called Bark, for example, that I've heard of through survivor leaders, and then also my brother, who uses it with my niece and nephews. He's a software engineer, so he knows a lot about all this stuff. And, you know, it monitors the social media, text messages, various apps like that, emails, and will send you alerts if there's something, you know, regarding adult content or things like suicidal ideation or depression. So they kind of monitor the language being used and the things being looked at. So I would really look into what might work best for you and your family.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, thank you. Another follow-up question. This has to do with Disney Plus and Hulu. How do predators use platforms like those?
So again, you know, really like Jen and Katie were saying, anywhere where you can connect or message back and forth is somewhere, right, where predators can be and client and youth can meet predators. And I know too that with the pandemic, something that a lot of streaming sites have kind of implemented or in the process of implementing is watch party capabilities, and also, you know, kids are using and adults are using other apps like Zoom to kind of watch movies together and do those kind of things. And so, you know, even on those things that don't have the messaging capability, you know, there are ways to kind of use that to connect. And I think, you know, we see it a lot in video games where people meet predators on the video games, right? They already have something in common there, that they like the same video game. And so with the streaming sites, right, there's already that commonality. Maybe they like the same movies, or they're really interested in watching the same movies. And so, yeah, there's definitely ways that that can happen on streaming sites.
Okay, we just have time for one more question. What are some practical ways I can start implementing limitations with my child? They are on screens most of the day and I'm scared to upset them or get them defensive.
Yeah, really good. Do either of you want to start on that, or?
I guess I would just say, you know, coming at it from a educational perspective versus, you know, I know you're gonna do something wrong, and so I want to prevent this before it happens, I think is a really great way. And just from an educational perspective, and also just, you know, protection as a parent, and more of kind of like, let's be a team and making sure this doesn't happen. And then also, again, I'd really recommend looking at those apps that you can put on their phone that will send you alerts, so you don't have to physically take their phone or like log into their accounts and read all their stuff. I think that might be feel a little less invasive for the youth.
Yeah, I think that's really good, Jen. I think too, yeah, like I think the one thing I really want to focus on in answering this question that I think I tried to focus on in the presentation is, if we take a look at all of this and what was in common on every slide, is our youth need connection. So like I said, like our youth aren't doing anything wrong. They're not wanting to be exploited. They're not wanting to, be trafficked or engage with these predators. They just don't know that they're vulnerable to it or that it's happening. And so I think with screen time and COVID and how that's all increased, like if we can think about how our youth just really need connection. And so what can we do as caregivers or parents to create specific time set aside for connecting with our youth so that they feel known and accepted and loved during this time. I think that is like very important, more than like, because that actually will decrease their need to find that emotional connection through the screen, if that makes sense. So I think that's something I just would highlight. And I also want to highlight, like, I know parents and caregivers are juggling 100 different things right now with being stay at home working and school from home and all the things. So I think being kind to yourself and kind to your youth and just finding ways to intentionally connect so that their emotional needs are being met, before they hit the screens.
Well, thank you, ladies. I appreciate you taking the time, and for everyone who was with us for the last hour. There was a lot of information to digest. So please look at the handouts that are attached, download them, share the recording with friends when you receive it tomorrow. And that concludes our webinar for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.